I've had lots of questions about what happened to Silicon Valley Bank last spring when it was the third largest bank failure in US history and the largest since 2008, which really put this bank on people's radar. What caused it?
I'll do my best. I'm personally baffled and very, very disappointed. You may well know that I was CEO from 2001 through 2010, and then I did something that was quite unusual. I retired. However, the board called me back because we got a signal from Beijing that they wanted us to develop a similar bank in China. And it turned out I was the only one who was really interested in going. A lot of people wanted us to go, but nobody else wanted to go themselves. So I was in China then for 4 years and came back and continued focusing on China with regular trips until the end of 2019. And at that point, I resigned. And I'm telling you that somewhat defensively because I am not personally responsible for the disappearance of SVB. And I can only guess because I've had limited contact with the organization during those years. You know, new management teams don't call up the old CEO every day and say, well, what should we do now? But here's what
you should have a pretty good, you will have a best insight other than maybe the current, maybe even better than the current management because they were so close to it that still probably they're bruised, their egos are bruised.
I like the way you worded that. I would agree with what you said. So here is fundamentally what happened. Of course, there's a lot of things happening, but what happened is this. Around 2019, about the time that I severed my ties, the bank had roughly 40 billion in loans and 50 billion in deposits. And that ratio is important because 40 to 50 would be an 80% loan to deposit ratio. And that's just perfect. You need that extra 20% in case one of the depositors wants their money back, right? So that was more or less perfect on the surface anyway. The unfortunate part about that is that a lot of that cash ended up in our bank. I mean, after all, we were one of the biggest banks in the country. I think we were 17th at the time.
16th.
16th. Woo, even better. And and a lot of that cash found its way into our innovation ecosystem. And because we were the dominant force in our innovation ecosystem on the banking side, commercial banking side, a lot of it ended up in our bank. Now, between 2019 and the day the bank disappeared, the deposits shot up from 50 billion to over 200 billion. That's an amazing climb. And the loans, they didn't stay exactly just the same, but they didn't go up that much. So maybe they went up from 40 billion up to 50 or 60 billion. But the deposits went from 50 billion up to over 200 billion. Now that's a problem for a bank because, well, because the way the banking system works per regulation and accounting principle, the bank has to set aside more capital in proportion to the increase in deposits.
But those deposits are there in the bank, right?
Yeah, they are.
They have it. Okay.
They have it, but you have to have a certain amount of capital in proportion to your deposits. So if your deposits get bigger, you have to have more capital. From a CFO's point of view, that's a waste of capital. It's an opportunity cost. But more importantly, in my opinion, whenever a bank CFO has a whole bunch of capital of deposits lying around that are not being used for anything, they immediately begin to dream about what they could do with those deposits, because they want to deploy them because everybody wants to be a hero. So they want to deploy them in a way that will earn more money for the bank.
Yep.
And, the CFO at the time I wasn't inside his head, I'm surmising, but he looked at those deposits and said, we certainly can make a lot more money if we deploy those deposits. So he decided to put them into long-term bonds. Now, bonds because they are interest-bearing, and long-term because the longer out you go, the higher the interest rate that you earn. The only problem with that is anybody who took banking 101 knows that that's dangerous, because if you've got a long-term bond and rates go down, your bond's worth more. You win. But if you have a long-term bond and rates go up, your bond is worth less and you lose. So in other words, taking excess deposits and putting them into long-term bonds is tantamount to gambling. And my personal way of looking at this is nobody can predict interest rates. If it were true that people could successfully and with great accuracy predict interest rates, then a whole industry would be wiped out, because there are tons of people out there on Wall Street predicting interest rates. Commercial banks should not be guessing about the direction of interest rates, because for us, that's gambling. What we do well is analyze companies and predict whether or not they'll pay us back if we lend them money.
They should be super conservative, right? I mean, banks should be super conservative. That was the whole point of the 2008 crisis, is they got involved in all this risky investments. They decoupled from being their conservative self, and then it collapsed. Do you think that this was purely then just a bad decision by management when the rates went up because the rates went up, right? A lot. And so it was just a bad decision to put it in bonds when the rates went up? Or do you think there was outside orchestration or funny games or anything?
I have absolutely no idea. I don't know of any outside orchestration. But I do know that it was very bad judgment. And to make matters even worse, they didn't hedge. They did for a short period of time, and then they withdrew the hedge, and they weren't even hedging. So in my mind, they were gambling in effect. And they were gambling in order to make more money for the bank. Presumably their bonuses might be bigger if they made more money for the bank, but I don't know the exact formula for that. I don't know.
Is this just really an advertisement for why banks need to be more conservative, get out of the whole investment gambling scene, and be utilities for the country?
Well, I certainly think that banks should not be investing excess deposits in long-term bonds. The deposits are there to make loans, and then to have some margin in case depositors want their money back. So it was a terrible decision. As you know, the bank went down in
It almost took our country down. I mean, it was so bad that it's really created almost a catastrophe. It was almost a 2008 situation, and they had to step in. And it was when I did the analysis, the losses, then there's 3 banks at that point that went down. It was more than what happened in 2008 in that year. Yeah.
That's
it was bad. They just knew how to stop the freight train better because they went through 2008, so it didn't happen this time, which I don't know what's going on. I mean, there's some big questions what's going on, right?
Yeah.
But that's how serious this was.
Yeah, and let me add one more thing to it, because as you, I'm sure, know, commercial banks, we're talking about commercial banks now, not investment banks. I'm not an expert on investment banks, and they are totally different animals. They just have the word bank in their title. But commercial banks have what the Fed refers to, what commercial bankers refer to as lines of defense, meaning if the CFO makes a bad decision, there are multiple lines of defense there to reverse that decision before you get into serious trouble. So the first line of defense would be the CEO, but the CEO didn't stop it. Second line of defense would be this thing, every bank has it, it's called ALCO, Asset Liability Committee. And that ALCO should have said, don't do this, stop it. And then there are others. There's the chief risk officer. There is the board. There's the board finance committee. There's the outside advisors, Goldman Sachs. And ultimately, there's the regulators. Because when you're as big a bank as we were, your regulators, they're not just visiting every couple of months. They're living with you. They have their own offices in the building. They're there all the time.
So everybody
They know
failed.
exactly what you're doing.
Everybody messed up then.
Everybody.
Did everybody get greedy? It was kind of like 2008 where they were getting greedy and too risky and too cocky on the situation. And then this happened.
I guess that's it, because I have no other explanation. Obviously, I can't
I
read
think there might be more, but okay. But the other thing is, this was the go-to bank for startups, for venture
Right.
capitalists. This
Oh,
was
we had-
the high tech, big tech bank.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what did that do to big tech? What kind of fear did it put through the investment community and through venture funds? And
Well, it kind of puts a hole on the market. And it makes us, in my opinion, it makes us on the international front less competitive, because innovation has to be financed by somebody. And SVB was a kingpin in the financing of innovation in our country. And if you don't have it, then I really believe that it puts you at somewhat of a competitive advantage. I don't mean that SVB's contribution to innovation in the US was the most important factor. There are other contributors too, but I do think that it does put a hole in the financial
you have
system.
to fund innovation, and shutting down, suppressing innovation wherever it is hurts.
Yeah.
It hurts.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more ways that they do that. But you have a curious background. You got involved in trying to set this same model up in China.
Yes.
And you ended up doing a 180 on your views of China based
Yeah.
on the situation. Why did you get involved? What were the pressures to get involved? Since you were the largest big tech bank, why were you interested in doing this in China? And then
All
I
right.
want to get into the other stuff.
Yeah, so let's go back to 2001. 2001, the bank, the board appoints me CEO of the bank. I've been there 10 years, 11 years already, and I'd been financing technology companies for 20 years at that point. And so I become the CEO. At that point, Silicon Valley Bank had what we called the three-legged stool strategy, which was developed by the first CEO and then further developed by the second one. Three-legged stool strategy looked like this. 1/3 of our portfolio consists of real estate developers. 1/3 of the portfolio consists of small business. And the final third of the portfolio consists primarily of venture-backed technology companies. And I looked at that and I said, I'd been saying it to myself for years, that strategy is not the best one. It's not the best one for this reason. Every other bank in the country lends money to real estate developers. Every other bank in the country lends money to small business. We were virtually the only ones who lent money to venture-backed technology companies, and we were really good at it. We had developed an art, a way of doing it that worked very, very well, and we always made money. So I said, why are we wasting our time in these other two areas where there are thousands of competitors, many of them do it better than we do? So my first decision, I made 2 or 3 decisions in that first couple of years as CEO, was to get rid of all the real estate developers, get rid of all the small business, and fill up the empty space with more technology companies. That's number one. Number two is I didn't want to just bank the little guys, the startups. I wanted to bank the big ones too. And so we made a decision to invest a lot of money in product so that we could compete with bigger banks for bigger technology companies. Because up until that point, we just banked the startups.
Mhm.
And then the third thing I wanted to do was go global. And that's for this reason. We had already come close to saturating the US. We had over 50% market share in the US. And yet technology is a lot different from almost any other industry you can think of. It's one of the only industries which is inherently global, meaning if you're cutting edge here, you have to be cutting edge everywhere. Or if you're cutting edge someplace else, you have to be cutting edge everywhere. So in all these technology companies, technology moves around the globe. You can't build walls high enough to stop it. You could work to prevent it from going to your enemies, if you will, but it still is a global industry. I felt that unless we were dominant in all of the innovation centers around the world, that eventually somebody else would be, and it would come back to haunt us here in the US. So while I was CEO, we went to Israel and built a big presence. We went to London, serving all of Europe, built a big presence. We went to India, tried to build a big presence. That was more difficult. China was the mystery to us. So in 2000, I got invited to go to China to speak at the first meeting of the Beijing chapter of the Chinese Venture Capital Association, which was just getting started then. There were probably 20 people at this meeting. Subsequent to that, we started sending teams to China to understand the environment. We wanted to better understand how this innovation space in China was developing. 2003, we organized a big trip for the best venture capitalists in the United States. You name anybody you think was among the best venture capitalists in the United States in 2003, and I'll guarantee you they were on that trip with us to China. Every one of them was so impressed, they set up an operation in China in the years to come. 2005, we set up our first office in China, but we couldn't do anything except talk to people because every single business activity in China requires a license, and we had no license. So starting in 2005, we had people on the ground every single day, and we were doing what I called kissing frogs, looking for a prince. And it was difficult work. We kept doing it and doing it and doing it. Finally,
trying to get a license. Your goal was to get a business license to be able to
it was
set
get
up
a business license. That's
Okay.
right. And to understand what was going on, how it worked. And finally, we had a breakthrough. In 2008, we had a breakthrough. And that is that I met the man who was the party secretary of the Yangpu district, which is one of the, I believe, 19 districts in Shanghai. So big city state, divided up into 19 districts. Yangpu was one that had been prominent when we were more manufacturing, when China was more manufacturing oriented, but by then it was a Rust Belt. And the party secretary there wanted to turn it from a Rust Belt into an innovation center. And he sidled up next to us and said, you know, we really want you here. And the rest is the story after that.
Okay. And then you got, okay, so what year was that they decided that you guys were capable of being, they wanted you? What happened?
Yeah, that was about 2008.
Okay. And when did you,
Early in 2008.
when did you start doing that? About that time?
When did I start?
Yeah. When did you become, was brought in to create?
So
the...
my wife and I moved to China at the beginning of 2011. So the way it works is this. You find a sponsor, and this was our sponsor, this party secretary of the Yangpu district, because he felt a need to have our bank there. And then he introduced us to different people at various levels in the Chinese government. And ultimately, well, I'll tell you the progression, because actually that's what the book is about. What the book is about is this. If you're going to take your business to China, you better understand what you're getting into, and you better understand the way it works, because otherwise it's not going to be a wonderful experience. There are steps in the process, and my argument is that every Western company that goes to China goes through these steps to one degree or another. And let me just take a minute and describe the steps to you, and then we can go back, circle back for more, to dig deeper into various points. The first step in the process is you end up being introduced to a very high-level official, depending on the importance level of your institution. In my case, the party secretary I mentioned to you introduced me to the party secretary of all of Shanghai. This would have been about a year later, the beginning of 2009. This is the party secretary of Shanghai at the time, already a very important guy because of his position. His name was Yu Zhengsheng. And 3 years later, when Xi Jinping took control of China, Yu Zhengsheng was promoted from party secretary of Shanghai to member of the standing committee, making him one of the 7 most important people in China.
Okay.
So Yu Zhengsheng sits with me at the beginning of 2009, actually on multiple occasions, and this is what he basically says. He says, you know, we have scoured the universe. We've looked at all the banks in the world, and yours is the bank that is most important to us. And he actually explicitly said, which I've often laughed about in the meantime, you are more important than Goldman Sachs. You're more important than Morgan Stanley. And they layer it on.
For sure. Do you think that, now that in hindsight, do you believe that that was something to butter you up, or do you think they really believed that?
Both. Okay. First of all, they really believed it. They did want our bank because they thought we could be helpful to them in terms of understanding the best way to finance innovation. But as the years went by, I learned that it's a very typical approach. It's along the lines of, Sarah, you are maybe the most intelligent American I have met. Really, you're the only one I've met that truly understands China. You are so smart. We need you here. We need your organization here. That's a very typical, you may think I'm
maybe this. So even though we know, that's awesome.
Well, here's what happens.
Okay.
First of all, you don't understand China until you live there. I had visited, by 2009, I had visited at least 20 times for a week or two. But you don't understand China until you live there. You know that there's a certain element of BS in this, but it does feel good. And you think, maybe, possibly, I'll be one of the first people to crack the code. Who knows? But you want to set up a bank in China, and this guy is saying he'll make it possible. He says, we'll pave the way for you. We'll get you the licenses you need. That's step 1. Step 2 comes a little later, maybe a few months later, maybe several months later, but step 2 looks like this. We're making great progress. We're so pleased. This is working out well for us and for you. But one thing we didn't mention, and we need to, you need to have a joint venture partner. It's not for us, it's for you, because China's complicated. And if with a joint venture partner, the partner will be there to guide you.
And they own half of it, or do they own the majority?
It all depends. Okay. Good question. But typically they own about 80%.
Okay.
But they let us negotiate hard and bring it up to 50%. As a result of which we thought we were, borderline geniuses.
They already had it figured out where their level would be and what they would end you at. And anyways, keep going.
It doesn't make any difference how much you own.
Okay.
If you're part of a joint venture in China, be absolutely certain China is in control.
That makes sense, actually.
Yeah. So they would have probably, if I'd whined loud enough or negotiated hard enough, I could have got it up to 60 or 70 maybe. But it wouldn't have made any difference. 10%, 50%, 70%, they're still going to control the organization.
They control it, but do they get that percentage of profits?
Oh yeah, but
You know what I
they're not. No, that's a good question. You're obviously paying close attention here. They'll get the percentage of profit that they negotiate, but they're not. That's not profit they're looking for.
It's control.
It's control and it's knowledge. They're looking for knowledge.
They wanted, let me tell, they wanted an in on the innovations that are going on so they could, okay, keep going.
Less that, more they wanted, that's true too, but more they wanted to understand how we do it. How do we so successfully finance technology companies? And I'll get to this in a few minutes. But they actually thought we had an algorithm that enabled us to differentiate between startups that weren't going to be successful and startups that were going to be successful.
Let me correct me if I'm wrong. Coming from a communist background, they've been shifting to investing in, because they know they have to invest in innovation. They know that they've changed it so it's not, people say it's all it's not all communist. Maybe it's technocracy, I don't know, but or maybe it's fascism, I don't know. But they really invest in capital and invest in innovation and in entrepreneurs. It's not what people think. It's this hybrid animal.
Right.
And so they didn't have the background, and so they needed to suck the information from you, suck your soul.
Yeah. They wanted us there so that they could learn from us. They could observe us. They could copy us. That was the whole name of the game. It's not, at least initially, it's not profit they're after. It's knowledge. So the next step in the process, by the way, looks like this. It came actually a year after, about 10 months after we arrived. It came in. Oh, by the way, let me finish up about the joint venture partner. They have one ready for you. You don't have to go looking for it.
Of course they
They have one ready. And then, so we went to China. When I say we, my wife and I, she wasn't working at the bank, obviously. She was studying art and culture, and I was building the bank. And 10 months into 2011, in October of 2011, they grant us the license, and they come to you and they say, we're so happy because we are now in a position to grant you a banking license. And this is just a wonderful day for all of us.
Did they invest anything in helping to build it, or was the investment all on your part at this point?
No, they put in half the equity.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, they put in half the equity, and in terms of the management, we supplied the CEO and the head of credit. CEO was me, and the head of credit was another man from our bank. And they supply the CFO and a couple of other positions. And then we hire in the market. But they also gave us 3 or 4 people from our joint venture partner, seconded them to us. I think the head of operations and the head of IT. Yeah. So and then we hire about 60 people in the market. But here's the rub. When they granted us the license, the banking license, it became almost instantly apparent that this banking license didn't entitle us to do anything other than call ourselves a bank and open the door and greet customers. It didn't allow us to do any banking whatsoever because China is different. They control the economy through in many different ways, but one is through licensing. So if you, Sarah, were from some other place and you decided you wanted to start a bank and you applied and the Federal Reserve or the controller of the currency gave you a banking license, that single license would entitle you to do anything that any other bank would do.
So, okay, so if they didn't
Not
give
true
you
in
license,
China.
if the businesses only can operate if they have licenses, they
Yeah.
were trying to figure out how to vet what businesses they should give licenses to, I would think, using you. Or were they not that astute? Their culture was so off from us that they couldn't really even learn from you.
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I just know that to actually operate a bank like ours in China requires about 20 or 30 different licenses. And even when our bank disappeared a couple of months ago in China, and I'll tell you how in a minute, we didn't have all the licenses we needed. They
So
granted
what
us
were you doing?
piecemeal over time.
So
But
what were you doing? I mean, were you actually even could make money?
not much. No, not at all. Because there's one other thing that I haven't told you yet, and that is they also told us that sadly, unfortunately, there's been a law in China for the past 40 years to the effect of which if you start a brand new bank in China and there's any foreign ownership whatsoever, and of course there was 50% owned by SVB, you cannot use Chinese currency for the first 3 years. We
Oh,
didn't know that until then, till we got the license. So here's your license. It's wonderful, but you need 20 more to actually do business. And by the way, you can't use Chinese currency for the first 3 years.
so they really control their economy. They don't allow foreigners in, whereas we're like, come on in, China. So
Right.
we have a totally different, and they see that and take advantage of that for
Oh,
sure.
clearly.
Because like
We're
we're stupid.
porous. We're
Yeah,
easy to
they're like,
penetrate.
woohoo.
Yeah.
So, but but they didn't learn anything from you, it sounds like, because they weren't, if you couldn't operate like you needed to operate, then they couldn't even really learn from you because it's like, well, I can't even do it. So you're not going to learn how we do stuff because you're not allowing us to.
Well, you're right, but they thought they were learning. And I'll tell you why I say that. First of all, when they explained to us that we aren't going to be able to use Chinese currency, it was pretty obvious that there wasn't much we could do because our target market was Chinese technology companies and they use Chinese currency. They don't use US dollars. They have no use for dollars. So what are we going to do? Well, first of all, we spent a huge amount of time training our employees, overtraining them for 3 years. But more importantly, they tried to use every opportunity to get us to divulge to them how we do things without actually being able to allowed to do them ourselves. So, for example, going back to that question about the algorithm, about sometime in 2011, my counterpart at the joint venture partner came to me and said he was very, very disappointed in me. He thought that I was not being fair or honest. Well,
The
why do you?
Chinese counterpart, the person in
Yeah,
China. Okay.
yeah. I saw him, every week, sometimes every day. But on this particular day, sometime in the middle of 2011, only months after we got there, he showed up and was very, very unhappy. He said, I wasn't being fair. What do you mean? Well, because I know you have an algorithm which will enable you to pick the right companies. You can tell using this algorithm which companies are going to be successful and which aren't. And I said, well, I hate to disappoint you, but there is no algorithm. That's not the way we do it. It's pattern recognition, and it takes years to train a lender. You can't just hand him an algorithm and he or she can do what they have to do. It takes years and years, and it's hard work, and it's just over and over and over again, looking at companies and developing an understanding of the patterns that it's pattern recognition, the patterns that imply the potential for success. He was very disappointed. The next thing was they wanted to know if, of course, we can't lend money, but could they start lending money to technology companies and we would train them in how to do it. They were constantly pushing us to train people in their bank to do what we do. Now, bear in mind, this is a joint venture. A joint venture is like a small family. There's a parent and there's a baby. We were the baby. We were the child of the two parents. And when we negotiated the shareholder agreement in the year before my wife and I moved to China, they agreed that they would never lend money to technology companies in China, that because that was going to be the business of the joint venture, right? Okay. It was the baby's business.
So they changed their mind and
they changed their mind. Now they wanted us to train them to do it.
So what happened then?
Well, we wouldn't do it.
Well, did you feel duped at the end of the day?
Yeah, I feel duped.
We didn't do anything. You didn't really have a business. You were just kind of messing around. And all you were doing is training people. Did you feel like you were being duped?
Yes, of course. Of course. I felt stupid.
You're not stupid, but you felt stupid. And then what happened? Did you eventually just
I decided that I would spend the majority of my time trying to get an exception, lobbying for an exception. And the rest of what was going on in the bank, we had about 62, 63, 64, 65 people. I assigned them to training activities and other things, sort of make work, if you will. And then I devoted my time to try to get an exception. I looked at I mapped out the Chinese government, and I mapped out 4 potential paths to an exception. And I worked those paths for about 2 years, 3 years, about 3 years.
And you didn't get anywhere?
No, not really.
Well, that's because they had their mind made up. They knew what they were doing.
Oh, absolutely.
So now, do you think that they tried to learn this? This was like, I think, tell me if I'm wrong. They wanted to learn our business practices with this method and see if you could just train their employees and learn. But don't they have spies? Isn't it almost a better use of their time or they're just probably doing everything, all the above, bringing in employees here who are really part of the Communist Chinese Party, infiltrating into businesses, learning our practices, and even being investors here, because we allow everybody invest here. And then they bring it back.
Right. That's totally true. But wouldn't it be, this is just a part of an overall effort.
Yeah, part of it.
One-off. This is part of a whole program.
So what was your main takeaway from this? Besides feeling duped, what was your main takeaway from the Communist Chinese Party and their role in the world and what they're trying to do?
All right, let me answer that question in a minute, because I want to tell you the last step of the program. Because there is a playbook here that is applied. And the last step is 3 years go by, and they come to me and they say, "We are so happy. The 3 years have gone by. Now we can grant you the license."
Oh,
I mean, allow you to use Chinese currency, excuse me. Allow you to use Chinese currency.
Oh, the 3-year wait. Okay.
Yeah, the 3-year wait, during which you can't use Chinese currency. And so they grant us permission to use Chinese currency. And in the same meeting, they say to me, one other thing. We so admire your business model. We're going to start a new bank ourselves next week, and we're going to use your business model. And they present that as if I should feel flattered that they admire us so.
That's
and
not a
and
flattering
then
statement. They didn't understand our culture to make that statement to you, but keep going.
no, that's absolutely true. They don't. And we don't understand theirs either.
Mhm.
Copying is not looked down on in China the way it is here. It's not. It's viewed here, it's viewed as theft, and in China, it's viewed as admiration.
Well, we get competitive. But that's
Yeah,
not necessarily, you can copy a business model, you can copy a marketing technique here legally, but it pisses us off because they played us this whole time.
right, exactly. Well, and what I'm here to tell you is, Sarah, that I'm the only one who admits to being played, but I'm not the only one who's been played. I would say the vast majority of Western companies that go to China are played. They fit into two or three categories. Some of them are played and know it, but don't want to admit it.
That's a
For several
cultural
reasons.
flaw. That's a cultural flaw of ours, but keep going.
And they also know that the Chinese government often, or Chinese Communist Party, tries to get even with people who
Oh,
tell the truth.
okay.
So that's number one.
Have you
Or
seen
they
a
don't even
pushback?
know they're being played
Have
because
you,
they don't get it, or it hasn't become apparent yet. It will become apparent at some point in the process, but they haven't figured it out yet.
so have you seen retribution?
Pardon me?
You said that the Communist Party, Chinese Party typically will come back and they don't like it when you tell the truth. So have you seen
Right.
retribution for your truth telling?
Well, first of all, my book isn't in print until November 13th.
Okay.
But I do know that there are many situations, particularly in these last several months now, where people that have written things that criticize the China in America that criticize the Chinese Communist Party are hiring American law firms, and those firms are threatening the people who write things along the lines of a typical threat will sound like this: cease and desist. Take your book or your paper off the web, or your book out of the bookstores, and apologize to us and never write about us again. That's going on right now in this country. And astoundingly, there are American law firms who will apparently do anything for money.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
That's very true. And the threat, a lot of times just the threat of the lawsuit will keep people from doing it. But a lot of times those kind of lawsuits, if it hits the media, it makes it worse for them. So you bring more attention to the book. So
right.
if they're going to go after you with your high profile, it'll bring more attention to the book. So it might backfire on them in this.
It might. It might. In China, though, you're entirely right there when you say it's to scare people, because their goal is to cause people to self-censor.
Yeah.
And in
That's
China,
what they're doing here with the new censorship thing. And it might be because of that influence, but I'm sorry, keep going.
yeah, there's a phrase in China that translated is this: kill the chicken. That phrase has been around for a long, long time, and that's probably what they're attempting to do. But if you don't know this, you need to know there are books out there just in the past couple of years. A few books have, they haven't been written by business people, but they have been written by scholars and think tank people. I can name a couple of them that you might be interested in, because these books are about the activities of the Chinese Communist Party in the US.
Yeah, that would be good. If you could give me some hints, or not hints, give me the names of some, and I'll include it in the
Or
show notes. So
I can give them to you right now, or I can email them to.
Well, you can
Yeah,
email
so
them, or
one
if there's a
book is
couple on the
called,
top of your list. Yeah.
there are several, but there are two in particular that I like. One is by Bethany Allen, and she's a think tank person, and she was a journalist, and she's the title of her book is Beijing Rules. And there's another book called Hidden Hand It's by two academicians, and now I would have to go to my notes to find the authors.
Well, yeah, if you can send me that, that would be
I'll send
great.
it to
And
you.
then I'll include it. We need to have more people like you coming out that's had actual experience. I did go to China. I want to say this before, I know you don't have that much time left, but I went to China and I actually thought the people were wonderful, right?
They are.
You lived there. The people are wonderful.
People
So
are great.
they're wonderful. But I did see an undertone. There is a heavy hand there by the government, and there's a different sense of freedom. And that heavy hand, I'm starting to feel come into this country. That heavy hand of fear. I live in the Twin Cities, which has that heavy hand of government control where the people start fearing. And it doesn't mean they're not great people, but they start fearing their own government. And there isn't that freedom that allows us to thrive. They have a different mentality. And I'm sure that's what you saw in your business experience.
Oh, yeah. And I can tell you there are several instances of universities in the United States that have been threatened by the party. So an example would be, and I'm not going to name names because it wouldn't be really fair, but one university I know where they invited the Dalai Lama to speak. And of course, the Chinese Communist Party hates the Dalai Lama. And so they come back to the university at the highest levels and say, if you let the Dalai Lama speak, we are going to punish you, and we'll do things like we won't recognize your degrees. So students won't continue to go to your university, or we'll cut off all contacts. So your researchers can't come to China and work on their research projects.
Well, I suppose all governments all powerful entities do this kind of thing, but we started seeing our government do a lot more of that in the last 5 years, which is probably the influence of this thing. One thing I want to ask you, because I know you got to go, is I have some people that I know that are in China, great, nice people that I really like, and I like the culture of China, but they have a different perspective. I want to understand them because I don't like to have countries fight. I don't like people fight. I don't like wars. I think they can be different than us, and we can protect our interests and not get duped like this happened, but yet not get sucked into a war, right? I mean, I think we have to be smart about this. But there are people I know, journalists living in China, who are pro-China, and I don't understand, because I don't understand, and this might be a follow-up conversation. And I don't understand why they can't see through some of these elements. If it's just because they're with the people and they like the people so much, but can't recognize the government. I mean, I don't know. Do you have any insight on that? And it might just be too big of a topic at this point.
It's a bigger. We've got only a couple of minutes left here, and that's a much bigger topic. But I do have insight, and there are other people who have insight too. But I'd be happy to try to help you to understand that. But it definitely is.
Because that's worthwhile to understand that, because these are genuine people. I mean, I don't think people are crap. They're genuine people, and we got to get through that, understand it, and protect our interests. And we don't want to go to war with people. We need to be smarter about protecting our interests, because clearly we're not, while also having a relationship with these people without needing to go to war, because war is not good for anybody.
No, I agree with you. And I will tell you that whenever anybody asks my wife or me, what was it like during your 4 years in China? We have the same answer. It was great. It was the most interesting 4 years of our lives. Chinese people were just fine. And we really enjoyed our life there. However, the Chinese Communist Party is the worst imaginable joint venture partner on earth.
欢迎来到六度解析新闻背后的多维思考，带你洞悉头条背后的世界。在今日华尔街频道的六度解析中，我们将深入探究时事热点，为你揭开新闻背后的真相。在这个信息泛滥、真相难觅的时代，六度解析应运而生。我运用海量数据、人工智能整合以及专家观点，层层剥析每个故事。透 通过实时背景数据挖掘，确保你获得全面的新闻资讯。然而，我们关注的不仅仅是数据，更重要的是将它们串联起来。我将分析多方视角，揭示隐藏的脉络，为你提供单一媒体常常忽略的背景信息。无论是政治、经济，还是全球事务，我都将为你带来最具洞察力的分析。试想一下，拥有洞悉全局的能力，做出明智的决策，参与有意义的讨论，这就是六度解析带给你的价值。它不仅仅是新闻分析，更是一种赋能的工具。加入今日华尔街的六度解析，共同探索头条背后的故事。你通往深度理解的旅程从这里开始。不要只是阅读新闻，要解码新闻，理解新闻，活出新闻。这一切尽在六度解析。立即订阅，不错过任何真知灼见。因为了解真相仅仅是个开始。